It may come as a shock to you, but Kid Icarus Uprising is one of my favorite games of all time. You wouldn't think that because unlike games like Undertale, Danganronpa, Persona, and Twowie, it isn't always on my mind, and I don't always talk about it. However, whenever I get reminded of its existence, I remember how fun it is. So today, I replayed through the entirety of Kid Icarus Uprising, and I'm going to be ranking every single chapter based on an overall rating. Story, dialogue, art, characters, gameplay, and music will all be a factor. Chapter 17, The Arm Brain. This chapter is bad. I know I normally say I like the flying parts of the levels more than the grounded, but the problem with this level is that it's a grounded level disguised as a flying level. I will admit the dialogue is funny, especially with Veridi actually shouting out the 20-sided dice, and the music swelling when Pyron takes over the Arum is also really cool. However, the problem I have with this chapter is solely on the grounded gameplay. Being stuck on the single platform, but still being in grounded controls is annoying in itself, and it makes it feel like you're making no progress at all. However, where this level really pisses me off is when you get to the Centurions. All the Centurions have their own invisible health bars, and all of them can die. If you don't successfully defend the Centurions, your platform falls and you die too. So you now have to micromanage both yourself and the Centurions with so much shit on the screen that it's difficult to even keep yourself alive. The boss fight is also kind of confusing. Arum Pyron is such a large target that it's not immediately obvious that you have to shoot the pillars on the outside to get to him, and nothing in the dialogue points it out. Once you do figure it out, though, it also gets annoying because sometimes you won't be able to spin around fast enough to face each pillar, and it might have to take a second trip around to get back to it. All in all, this is the worst chapter in the game because it's annoying, the gameplay sucks, the boss sucks, and it drags the gameplay to a halt. Chapter 7, The C4 Palace. I don't like this chapter at all. It just feels like a filler chapter. Like they said, oh, we need to come up with something to do between now and the Medusa fight. Here's Thanatos. The level itself is fine, it's nothing special, but it's really nothing unique that other levels don't do. They tried to do this neat thing with the ocean setting, but the game doesn't really do anything with that in terms of gameplay. At least it's pretty to look at. The music for flying section at the start is a sick Egyptian-style remix of the Overworld theme from the game on the NES, which I liked, but other than that, the music didn't really wow me. And then it goes on to actively insult me with its characters. Poseidon doesn't really show up for the rest of the game, he's literally only there for like a quarter of the level, and even then, he doesn't say much. He's just there. Like, why is he even in the game at this point? And then there's Thanatos. For a character called the God of Death, you'd think he'd be a lot cooler, and instead, you get the most annoying character in the game, and I think that's on purpose, but it doesn't keep me from finding him annoying. His voice pisses me off, everything that comes out of his mouth is utter bullshit, and his boss fight isn't fun, he adds nothing to the story. Thanatos is the main reason why Chapter 7 is one of my least favorite in the entire game. Chapter 1, The Return of Palutena. I'm not gonna lie, this chapter doesn't really do anything wrong per se. It's a fine opening chapter, you know, but that's just that. It's an opening chapter. It's kind of short, too short for my liking. To be honest, it's basically simple. It's just like, hey, Medusa's back, go kill her. And yeah, while that's a good thing for an opening chapter to do, it's kind of like, that's all this chapter does. I guess it also makes a point with ramming it into your skull that it's been 25 years since the last game, and like, guys, we get it, okay? You don't need to say it so many times. But other than that, my main problem with this chapter is that it's just short and uneventful. Yeah, it's just the call to action chapter, but nothing interesting happens, you know? However, I will give it one thing, and that's that the music sells the Grand Return level to a T. Like, you feel that, yeah, Kid Icarus is back. It almost makes the dialogue ramming Kid Icarus is back into your face kind of tolerable. Again, not a bad chapter, but it really just doesn't hold a candle to the rest of the chapters in the game. Chapter 24, The Three Trials. Hey kids, do you like boss rushes? I sure don't, but that's literally all this chapter is. It's a boss rush, and unlike Chapter 9, the boss at the end isn't really worth it. It's just a filler chapter, and I think this game would be fine without it. Chapter 13, The Lunar Sanctum. I'm a bit conflicted on this chapter. On one hand, it's set up for one of my favorite arcs in the whole game. However, on the other hand, it's kind of uninteresting in a vacuum. Arlon isn't too interesting of a character, and the area by itself, in terms of art and music, isn't that interesting. It's by this point, too, that the forces of nature get a bit uninteresting to fight. And Arlon's fight is kind of just a gimmick, with the whole darkness thing getting on my nerves, especially with the controls of the game being how they are. All in all, Chapter 13 is sure a chapter that exists, but not one I'd find myself thinking about often. Chapter 12, Wrath of the Reset Bomb. This chapter is honestly just kind of there. The art design is great, but it's nothing to write home about, you know? The one saving grace this chapter gets is the interactions between Virides and Hades. Having two of the most entertaining characters on the screen at the same time makes for fun interactions. However, the interactions only get better as the game goes on, and for now, it's just kind of mellow. The boss isn't really anything to write home about either. It's completely unmemorable. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot about this chapter when I was doing my replay through. That's how unmemorable it is. The one saving grace this chapter has is the music, because it's just a better version of Chapter 11's music. But it's not enough to save this mediocre chapter. Chapter 3, Heads of the Hudraw. This really is just a filler chapter. It's really not anything to write home about. The Hudraws were funny, I guess, and I like that the order you kill them in the aerial fight changes the ones you fight later. Also, the fact that it's one of the only aerial boss fights in the game makes it really interesting, but other than that, it's nothing special. The music is alright, the ground theme in particular is very good, but my main problem with this chapter is that it is host to one of the most out-of-character things that Palutena does. Like, I get she puts Pit into danger and says, "Good luck, Pit," quite often, but in this chapter, she goes out of her way to make life worse for him by trying to summon both Hudraw heads to his location. And for one of the first few chapters of the game, I worried that it might put a damper on the way people see Palutena for the rest of the game, which is sad because Pit and Palutena really do care for each other, as you see later. But the first glimpse you get into their bond outside of the first two chapters really paints Palutena in a negative light that I don't think fits her. Chapter 23, Lord of the Underworld. This chapter's alright. The flying section is okay. I like the first boss fight against Hades, and using the 3 sacred treasures is always fun. Hades jump scaring you at the start is also really funny, and if I were playing in 3D, it would have been even funnier. In terms of grounded gameplay, though, it's nothing to write home about. It's not very interesting, but since Hades and Pit are the only characters that can speak, we do get a lot of time talking to Hades. That being said, this chapter relies a lot on toilet humor, and I mean, I get it, Hades literally bored you, but it starts to get a little old after a bit. Despite that, I still had a good time because the other humor was really funny. Just seeing Pit be forced to talk to himself during the boss fight is entertaining. Speaking of which, the boss is the fucking bane of my existence. Like, stop running, you little bitch, get your ass back here. It is probably the worst boss in the game. I hate it. Chapter 9, Medusa's Final Battle. I have mixed feelings about this chapter. On one hand, the air battle section is extremely well made. It's a lot of fun, and I especially enjoyed the fact that the boss fight is done in the air, which is honestly a rarity for this game. Every character gets their moment to shine, especially Dark Pit, who we finally start to see start coming around. The problem I have this level is that it's just a slog to get through. Once you get to the ground section, you have to go through a boss rush with multiple sections with enemies leading up to each boss. Then you have to go through another long section in the castle before fighting Medusa. To me, the level just got very long and monotonous. It felt like it was never going to end. Once it did end, though, on the fight with Medusa, which was cool, I can say that it was a pretty decent final level, if a bit long. Okay, we can't finish talking about this level without talking about Hades. I mean, like, what a way to make an introduction. Tear up the credits, reveal that he's the true villain, and fuck off. What a fucking guy. Hades might honestly be one of my favorite Nintendo characters ever, and this introduction is just the perfect way to introduce him. Almost makes it getting through the slog that is this chapter worth it. Chapter 10, The Wish Seed. This chapter is okay. The gameplay pisses me off though. While the sky battle is fun, dodging pillars of lava and stuff, the land battle truly pisses me off to no end. The way that ICARUS Uprising works, the controls make it hard to stay on these tiny platforms and go where you need to go, and just getting hit once means that you're going to go into the lava and take more damage. It gets really frustrating. The dialogue is alright, being your first real introduction to Hades' bullshit, and his whole spiel about the girl and her parents is funny, but it just isn't anything to write home about. All in all, this chapter is just there. Chapter 2, Magnus and the Dark Lord. This is the chapter that introduces you to Magnus, and Magnus is cool, but like, he only appears for 3 out of the 25 chapters in the game, and yeah, that's more than some other characters, but I do think his character isn't as compelling as the other characters in the game. Also, his backstory never really interested me. His character brings up interesting points of how humans view the gods from their perspective, but it's never really expanded upon because the story is mostly about the gods, not the humans. But that leaves Magnus' story arc feeling kind of half-baked to me. Other than that, the gameplay and music is fine. The real standout of the chapter is Magnus' theme, so it's lucky that it plays during a large part of the grounded section of the chapter. It's a neat track. As for the other tracks of this chapter, they're alright. Nothing special like chapter 1's, but nothing terrible. Again, this chapter isn't bad, it just doesn't hold a candle to the later chapters in the game. Chapter 4, The Reaper's Line of Sight. Pit and Palutena really get off to a bad start in Chapter 3, but this chapter really sells both of them as characters, and they both get time to be funny. This is when the game really starts to get funny, and it shows with these two's interactions. I finally get sold on the bond that these two share from their character interactions, and this chapter is just the start of that. That being said, the chapter doesn't really have its memorability factor like other chapters do. Its boss doesn't even speak, and it doesn't really accomplish much for the overall plot. Also, the Reapers can be a bit annoying. I normally dislike stealth mechanics in games, and for a game whose control scheme is as unique as Uprising's, I don't think stealth fits it much. That being said, the music for the boss fight is extremely good, one of the best in the game, and I really like how they used an 8-bit jingle from the original game and turned it into one of the best tracks in the game. I really enjoyed that. Chapter 16, The Arm Hive. This chapter is okay. It's a decent chapter, don't get me wrong. I love all the characters interacting and being chill with each other. Viridi and Hades are especially a treat to listen to. The art design of this level is also okay, with it getting better the more you get through the level, and at the end there being a cool visual. The problem that I have with this level is, for one, the gameplay. The gameplay is alright, but the boss was really annoying. I don't know if it was a bug or something, but I straight up could not see the grind rails, making the boss essentially a timed battle where I had to kill it before it inevitably killed me, as I was essentially stuck to one rail. Even if I could though, I really dislike grind rail gameplay in ICARUS Uprising. I think it, combined with the ground controls, makes it difficult to aim. Secondly, I just feel like this chapter is extremely outclassed by the previous chapter, Chapter 15, in terms of everything it tries to do. It just seems like another episode in the Aram arc, rather than the great intro to the arc that Chapter 15 was. Chapter 19, The Lightning Chariot. This chapter's alright, it's nothing really to write home about, but it's a great chapter. Starting off, the music is one of those iconic Uprising tracks that really remind me of the game, and the land battle theme is really entertaining, and so is the world design. I love the design of the giant tower. The banter between Pit and Viridi and Hades was also really good in this chapter. I love to see the three of them arguing, and it's a good return to form after the somber tone of the previous chapter. However, I would have liked to see a bit of that somber tone return in this chapter due to the fact that Palutena is still under the Chaos Kin's control. My main problem with this chapter though is the length. The ground section is just too long. It makes me feel like Pit, saying, "Are we there yet?" after every floor. Some of the floors are really frustrating too, such as the floor with the wind. I don't like the Chariot Master, he's just not that interesting of a character. However, his boss fight is really cool, so that makes up for it. So, all in all, this is a solid chapter, but not one without flaws. Chapter 8, The Space Pirate Ship. This chapter is alright. From a visual standpoint, it's one of the best looking chapters in the game. I just love the feeling of flying through outer space, going after the space pirate ship, and even in the grounded sections, they mix it up by having you traverse in and out of the ship on these glowing walkways. It's also the first level to introduce a third faction, and I find that cool as well. The music is one of my favorite tracks in the game. It fills you with a sense of heroic outer spaciness that just sticks with you. So why is this level comparatively low? Well, that's because this chapter is essentially another filler chapter. This chapter really holds no weight to the plot, you just go after the three sacred treasures. The lack of any other character other than Pit and Palutena within the dialogue also makes it get a bit stale. I feel as though ICARUS Uprising works best when it has a bunch of characters bantering, so I feel like just having Pit and Palutena there is kind of boring. Other than that though, this is a solid chapter in everything but story and dialogue, so I decided to give it the benefit of the doubt and rank it higher than I would. Chapter 21, The Chaos Vortex. I'm super conflicted on this chapter. On the one hand, I love the flying segment. It's one of the craziest flying segments in the game, up there with Chapter 5, and it fits the theme of the Chaos Kin perfectly. It's, well, chaotic, but more than that, it's just fun to play through, even when your screen is getting covered up by shit. However, the grounded section leaves a lot to be desired in terms of gameplay. It's just wave after wave of enemies, and yeah, that's okay sometimes, but the grounded portion of the gameplay of this level is only this one platform, which gets boring after a while. I will say that the dialogue in this chapter is amazing. It's no secret that this game has no fourth wall, but in this chapter, the third, second, and first walls all come crashing down too. It's like they were saving their best material for this chapter. It's enough to keep me entertained throughout the monotonous enemy slaughtering. The interactions between Pit and Dark Pit are great too. I love when both of them are interacting in this game. However, this level wouldn't be as high as it is if it weren't for the ending. The ending is honestly the climax of Pit's character arc throughout the whole game, and especially the Chaos Kin arc. Pit, not Viridi, not Palutena, makes the choice to jump after Dark Pit. Despite Viridi wanting you to stop, and I'm sure Palutena would do the same, Pit makes the choice as his own person to save Pitu, knowing he might die. It's the perfect culmination to Pit's character arc. Chapter 14, Lightning Battle. Normally this chapter would rank pretty low. The gameplay isn't that interesting, and it's downright annoying at times because of the lightning walls in the grounded section combined with the controls of the game. However, there are three saving graces. First of all, the music, fucking banger. Another one of those iconic Kid Icarus tracks. Secondly, the flight portion is really cool to watch. It's fun to watch two people fight each other instead of you. Finally, the best thing this chapter has going for it is Phosphora. She's another great addition to the game, and though she isn't much present, the impact she leaves is undeniable. Then some of the funniest dialogue in the game comes from her interactions with Palutena. Again, not a super deep character, but she doesn't need to be, and I'm glad she's in the game. Chapter 15, Mysterious Invaders. This is a really good introduction to the Arum arc. I love how it just comes out of nowhere in the middle of everything. It's shocking how it happens, but it still fits within the game. I love the introduction to Pyron. He's an interesting character, and he's great. And the music goes really hard too. The one place where this chapter falters is the art design. While the enemy design for the Arum are cool, the world is kind of and the boss isn't interesting. It's just an object, not a character. However, this chapter more than makes up for it in terms of gameplay and character interactions. The gameplay is great, now with Pit fighting 3 different factions at the same time, which I find interesting and unique for the gameplay. However, most importantly, this is the chapter where Pit, Palutena, Hades, and Viridi all start interacting a lot. I find ICARUS Uprising to be at its best when all the characters are bantering, and they're all extremely funny in this chapter. It's funny to watch them have to put aside their differences to take on the bigger threat, but still be antagonistic to each other. Shout out to Hades for his "hey look, who cares" line. That one really got a kick out of me. But all in all, Chapter 15 is a great time and entertaining the whole way through. Chapter 22, Scorched Feathers. First of all, you get to play as Dark Pit. Yeah, he plays the exact same as Pit, but it's nice to be playing as a different character for once. Also, because he has infinite flight, nearly the whole level is a flying battle. I think the flying battles are better than land battles, so I love this chapter. The world design is also amazing. I especially love the shot with the Torrent of Souls, and the boss fight against Pandora is alright. I don't know why they made her an anime woman though. Plus, the fake out death that she does in the middle of the boss fight sent me for a loop. This chapter is all around amazing. I love the dialogue as it's way more serious than other chapters, with Dark Pit actually bringing up good points against the gods. Of course, Hades is in this chapter, so there's still some humor. My main problem with this chapter is that it's just not as memorable as the other chapters. I don't know why, it just isn't. Also, I would have liked it if Pit got the ability to fly by himself after being dipped in the rewind spring. I think that would have been a really good payoff to Pit's whole character arc, as like a symbolic gesture that he's his own person now. The fact that that doesn't happen honestly drags this chapter down a bit for me, but all in all, this is a fantastic chapter. Chapter 5, Into the Labyrinth. Chapter 5 is one of my favorites when it comes to the environment. I love the ways it fucks with your head. I love the drastic differences it goes to. It's amazing. This level, more than anything, feels like some sort of VR ride where you have to stop at fake walls, turn, and keep going in random directions. It's this level, more so than any, that makes this game feel like a sort of ride. I also like how it goes to different places, outer space, the town, and other places. It's one of those levels that lets you choose your own path, which is another part of the game I really enjoy. In terms of the on-land gameplay, the motorcycle is cool, and I like the puzzle with the invisible path. Really, the only part where the level misses is the music. I mean, it kind of fits the theming, but I don't know, it's just not as much of a banger as the other soundtracks in the game. Finally, this level introduces Pandora, who works really well with Palutena, and Dark Pit, who's one of my favorite characters in the game. He isn't around much though. He just shows up, kicks the shit out of Pit, and then leaves. What a fucking guy. Chapter 11, Viridi, Goddess of Nature. Chapter 11 is a really good introduction to Viridi's character. I love the art design for the reset bomb. Once again, one of the most visually stunning parts of the game. It's amazing to fly through this twisted forest. Having a bunch of new types of enemies to contend with makes the gameplay more interesting too, especially on the ground. However, the boss isn't very interesting. It's just Rock Guy. He doesn't say much, he never reappears again, really not very interesting. Where this level gets so high in the ranking is twofold. One is the music, because this music is one of those iconic to ICARUS Uprising type of music. Really, you only remember the one part, but even that one part is enough to make the song stick out in your head way more than other songs in the game. And then finally, Viridi herself. She's a very entertaining character, probably my third favorite in the game after Hades and Dark Pit, and I love how she gets involved with the plot as an enemy. However, she taunts Pit and Palutena and is a constant presence throughout this arc and the rest of the game. She's a really entertaining character, and this chapter is a great introduction to her. Chapter 25, The War's End. Going into this, I recalled this chapter being my favorite when I played it as a kid, and it's got all the makings for a stellar chapter. For one, it's solely an air battle, and as you know, I prefer air battle far more than land battle. Secondly, it's got all sorts of different action set pieces. Hades and Pit never give the other a break, from Hades chasing you down like a mad animal to Pit activating many different forms of the Great Sacred Treasure. It's great. The music is also a banger. It's got such a bombastic feel to it. The dialogue is some of the best in the game. I love how every main character is there for the final battle, and it's some of the funniest, but also the most menacing dialogue in the whole game, especially from Hades. Since you spend the whole chapter fighting him, he's really entertaining the whole way through. The ending, with Hades coming to delete your save file on the end screen, is probably my favorite Easter egg in any video game ever, excluding Undertale's fun events. I think it's amazing, and I love that bit. So, why is this chapter not number 1? Well, I don't know if it was an issue with my my official Nintendo 3DS, but this phase where Hades shoots the balls is fucking annoying. For some reason, in this phase, and it feels like just this phase only, the way the reticle controls is weird. It just feels like it's fighting against you. Furthermore, the timing to hit the blue orbs is surprisingly tight, and sometimes my bullets would just straight up miss. Finally, the part where you have to keep your reticle locked onto Hades as he's charging is annoying, and it doesn't make it clear that you have to drag the touchscreen over and over when you never do that in the rest of the game. All in all though, chapter 25 is a great chapter. I love it for what it does in terms of the story, and all the character interactions are funny as hell, but I just can't put this chapter in the top 3. Chapter 18, Ring of Chaos. You know when I say a lot that ICARUS Uprising's best strength is when all the characters are on screen bantering? I still stand by that, but sometimes a game needs to know when to slow down and take a breather to try and tell the story it's telling. The opening of this chapter is the perfect representation of that. Just walking, with the child and then the dog, puts into retrospect how Pit must be feeling. Alone, confused, by himself. Finally grouping up with Magnus and realizing what Palutena's been up to is interesting too, and playing as a character other than Pit is always fun, and the boss fight against Pit's body is a lot of fun too. The chapter isn't without its jokes, and Pit and Magnus interacting is always funny, but the chapter knows that it's one of the most serious in the game, and thus goes a bit easier on the jokes. However, the best part of the chapter is easily the confrontation with Palutena. This is truly the start of Pit's character arc, and where he finally becomes his own person instead of just Palutena's puppet. And Palutena, being the villain, explicitly calling out Pit as a puppet, must be a big hurt to his ego and his pride, because that's what he has been. This arc is all about Pit learning to not be a puppet anymore and to do his own thing while still liking Palutena and wanting to serve her. Viridi is just the cherry on top, because the menu screen after the mission has Viridi talking to Pit, and Pit actually says Viridi isn't that bad. This chapter is the start of Viridi's character arc too, and is a turning point for the game where the characters become a lot more serious and also start getting along more, except for Hades of course, and I really enjoy that. Chapter 20, Palutena's Temple. I love this chapter. This, along with chapter 18, serves as the crux of Pit's character arc. This chapter doesn't really have a flying segment, instead starting with this Toho-like segment on the lightning chariot, which I found to be a unique change of pace. But once landing on Palutena's temple, the chapter really begins. Like chapter 18, this chapter knows how to keep the humor on a down low. It's still got plenty of humor. Anytime Hades is on screen, there's bound to be humor. but it knows to keep it down in favor of Pitt's introspective speeches. Yeah, to some, these speeches might be ham-fisted, but it fits Pitt's character to make these speeches about himself, and I love the grandioseness that he goes for. He has to confront the fact that he was a puppet for Palutena, and come to terms with that fact, and decide to take a stand against her, to save her, yes, but also to save what he, as a character, believes in. One line that stood out to me was when Pitt says, "As the captain of your guard, it's my duty to save you from what you've become, and if saving you means defeating you, I'll do what I have to do." That line really shows how far Pitt's come as a character. The music and art direction paints the whole level as a tragedy of Pitt finally becoming their own person, but having to fight their own mentor to do so. I love the imagery of a destroyed sky world as the player must fight through what it once was. The music is amazing, one of the best tracks in the game, and while I prefer the Smash Ultimate version as a song, I feel as though this version fits way more for the set piece. My one wish for this chapter is that I wish the boss fight was an aerial boss like Medusa was. I feel as though having Palutena be giant and having you fly around her could have shown just how powerful Palutena truly is. All in all, though, with an appearance from Dark Pit at the end, it shows this chapter's amazing story. Chapter 6, Dark Pit. You know this one had to be up there. This chapter basically encapsulates everything I love about Dark Pit. For the sky battle, I love that while the underworld army is there to provide targets for you to shoot at, Dark Pit is a constant presence throughout, going after both you and the enemies. I love the section towards the end in particular where he uses the turret to attack you, and the game hides you behind the walls to avoid his attacks. Of course, the land portion is also really good. I love that Dark Pit is constantly fucking with you the whole level instead of just being a boss at the end, like characters like Pandora and Dark Lord Gao are. The dialogue, while not being as witty as other levels, of course has its moments, with Dark Pit being Kristen Patu, and of course my favorite line, Pit Stain. But really, my favorite moments in this chapter come from the moments where they actually talk seriously. The Mirror of Truth in Chapter 5, in creating Dark Pit, sort of, to me, acts like Shadows do in Persona 4, to draw a comparison. It's the dark feelings within Pitt's heart that Pitt refuses to acknowledge and doesn't want anyone to know. His rebellious feelings of wanting to be his own person outside of Palutena's servant. A theme that, as a kid, I didn't really pick up on, but I get it now. I think that Dark Pit serves as the crux of this theme. And of course, you can't talk about Chapter 6 without talking about the music. Dark Pit's theme is my favorite song in the game. It's got a vibe that no other song in the game does, and it just perfectly encapsulates Dark Pit's rebellious attitude perfectly. When I think of the Kid Icarus Uprising OST, this is the song that comes to mind first. And that is why Chapter 6 is my favorite chapter in Kid Icarus Uprising. And that's my ranking of every single chapter in Kid Icarus Uprising. Be sure to tell me how I'm wrong and stupid in the comments below, and while you do, please consider subscribing and watching my other videos. I spent a long time on this one, so any support is appreciated. I've got more content on the way for everyone, so stick around. Goodbye!